Welcome back to the show. Well, you may remember her as 6-year-old Susan in Miracle on 34th Street, the endearing youngest child of Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire, or as Matilda, the little girl with very special powers. Well, Mara Wilson is now all grown up, but unlike many of her peers, she's managed to stay on the straight and narrow, and she's got some good advice for budding child stars. I caught up with her earlier from New York. A very good morning to you, Mara. Now, we've been watching child stars go off the rails for some time now, most recently Justin Bieber and Amanda Bynes. So what prompted you to write this article right now?
Well, it's something I've been thinking about for a very long time. I think that child stars are often a victim of ridicule. I think that they become something of an easy target.
What role do you think parents play in child stars going off the rails or even staying on the rails?
I think parents are the most important part. I think parents really need to be there for their kids, and they need to make sure that this is what the kid wants to do. That is the number one most important thing. I've seen so many parents who live vicariously through their children, and they made their children very miserable and resentful later on in life when the child realized that they were basically being used by their parents.
The problem is Hollywood is such a strange beast, and there are so many situations that parents probably can't even prepare a child star for. Tell us about the moment at the Hugh Grant premiere that really floored you when you were a young girl.
It was right after Hugh Grant had been arrested for soliciting a prostitute. And so I was being asked these questions, you know, like, oh, what are you up to these days? Are you making any movies? How are you doing? And then I got to one reporter and she said, so did you hear about Hugh Grant being arrested? And I had heard he got arrested, but I wasn't sure what for, and I was years away from understanding the implications, and so I just said, yeah. And she said, okay, well, what do you think about that? What's going on there? And I was 7 years old. I didn't have any opinion on it. Even then, I knew this is something that I'm not supposed to know about. And the next day, my father called and said, you know, that was really inappropriate. Why would you ask a 7-year-old that? And the people there just blew him off. They just didn't care. They just rebuffed him.
Having come through the process of Hollywood, particularly, you know, a huge movie like Mrs. Doubtfire, what advice would you have for child stars and parents of child stars on how to come through that process? Because you did.
You need to make sure that the child is okay with rejection. That is the first thing my parents did. They made me realize that I was going to be rejected on auditions. I was going to be rejected over and over again, and I couldn't let it get to me. It needs to be fun. It needs to be something that's almost a hobby for them. My parents, when I was filming Mrs. Doubtfire, my parents helped me put together a scrapbook. So it was like fun. I also think that it is incredibly important for a child to get an education and to realize that this might not be what they want to do when they grow up, that this might be something that they grow out of.
You look at the example of Justin Bieber. Michael Bublé said something very interesting recently, that the problem with instant fame is that from the moment you become that famous, emotionally, you stop growing. Would you agree with that?
I do think so. I think that a lot of child actors and child stars spend their life in this a period of arrested development, really. Once you're famous, you do not have freedom. You don't get to decide what you're doing because your every moment is scrutinized and you're not allowed to make mistakes.
Well, Mara, it's lovely to speak to you. You do speak very, very wise words, and I'm sure there's a lot of parents listening who would agree with you. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh. Yeah, she's got her head screwed on.
Yeah, lovely woman.
Yeah, she's 25 years old now. She is a woman, and Mara is a writer, and a really good writer at that. And you can check out her blog at marawilsonwritestuff.com.
She was very good in Star Wars. Very good in Star Wars.
I don't remember that one.
Star Wars?
Well, I remember Star Wars, but I don't remember her.
She was one of the Ewoks, yeah.
Excellent.
In the early days.
Great.